Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about the most useless and wasteful exercises that you will see people commonly doing in the gym. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, there's a lot of wasteful exercises we see on the internet and things. Yeah, we do, but they're not done commonly, meaning it's not stuff you're going to see every single day. Squatting on Bosu balls, actually probably anything involving a Bosu ball. Women doing these booty specific exercises instead of squatting and deadlifting and all that, sure, that stuff's useless. I've heard many people argue that excessive warm-ups are useless. They are. That's all true. That's absolutely true. But when it comes down to the most useless exercises that you see people commonly do, I'm going to say doing partial range of motion with any sort of isolation or dumbbell exercise. Now, why is that, you might ask? Well, first of all, when it comes to efficiency, and again, efficiency isn't always best, and I want to make that point clear. There are times when not being efficient can yield better results in the gym. But in terms of overall efficiency, it is generally agreed by every expert, every coach, every researcher that the biggest, heaviest compound movements that involve the most muscle mass will usually have the biggest impact on your overall size, your overall strength, and even your overall shift in body composition. So in other words, the big movements, standing presses, deadlifts, squats of different types, weighted chin-ups, weighted dips, bench presses, rows, big movements that involve a lot of muscle mass, right? Big movements that involve a lot of muscle mass. Now, the counter argument that's usually made for people incorporating things like dumbbells, even dumbbell compounds, and just in general isolation movements is what? That they're slightly easier to recover from in some cases, and that they can work a muscle, specific muscles, not the overall musculature of the body, because you can't possibly work the overall musculature of the body more with these exercises than you can the biggest movements. In part because you can't even move the same amount of weight a lot of times. Even comparing a dumbbell to a barbell, especially on the big lifts, you're not going to move the same amount of weight. So you can't recruit the same number of muscle fibers. And what I mean is do a similar range of motion, not necessarily comparing that to partials. But the argument here is that these things can work certain muscles in different ways. In other words, if you're working a muscle in a different way, you're hopefully recruiting muscle fibers in certain heads of a muscle and things like that you would normally get. And in some cases, there's a valid argument for that. In other words, dumbbell chest press is what a lot of people say. Of different types, and I don't care if we're talking about a flat, an incline, whatever, you can get a deeper stretch. Now, some people argue, well, you can contract more at the top. That's irrelevant. That contraction at the top with those dumbbells, like trying to squeeze at the top, it doesn't put a single drop of muscle on you. There's no research to vindicate that, and basic physiology will tell you that's not true. But that stretch at the bottom, you can get a deeper stretch. There is the possibility with that in many cases that for some people, they're going to recruit more muscles in their pecs than they could with a barbell, because they can get a deeper stretch and elicit a stronger myotatic or stretch reflex. That's actually true in some cases. Not universally true. It's not going to be for every person, not in every situation, but it certainly has some merit, doesn't it? Because you can get a deep stretch on it. Well, let me ask you a question. If you just do a partial and you don't go all the way down and get the stretch, did it give you any benefit? No. You wasted time doing a dumbbell. You could have just done a heavy chest press with a barbell with more weight on the bar through the same range of motion and fatigued the primary movers more. You wasted a little bit of effort with trying to stabilize the dumbbells, getting them in a position, all that. You wasted energy. They could have been used moving some big weight. In other words, you're not going to get as much muscle fiber recruitment. And kind of the point we get to with that also is, what do we know from all the research on partials? Partial exercises recruit fewer muscle fibers than taking an exercise through its fullest range of motion. The only downside is there are a few cases where the fullest range of motion might increase injury risk. Most exercises it doesn't, but in some cases it can, and particularly for some people's anatomy. People argue that a deep deficit deadlift can hurt some people's lower back easier. That's a valid point. Weighted dip all the way down can injure you. All right, there's a lot of exercises that at really extreme range of motion can cause injury, higher injury rates in some people depending on your structure. But generally it is agreed that you get more muscle fiber recruitment through doing a fuller range of motion. So when you start doing things like dumbbells, that the reason a lot of dumbbell exercises are preferred by some people for hypertrophy is the potential for a longer range of motion. In other words, deeper stretches, fuller contractions of the muscles, because the barbell doesn't get in the way. You have a freer, more unlimited range of motion that you can utilize. And sometimes on independent size, things like that. So the problem you have, though, if you're doing a partial, that doesn't work, does it? You're losing 100% of the benefits of dumbbells. Dumbbells do not balance your left to right. And I've covered that many times. I probably should cover that again, because people say, well, no, because you have the same load on each side. You're not guaranteed to have the same load on each side just because you have a dumbbell. It doesn't work that way. In fact, we can create an argument that the bad form on the barbell movements that creates a left to right imbalance can be made worse by dumbbells. It can be made worse by dumbbells, but that's a totally different topic. Same thing, isolation movements. Why do people do isolation movements? Because there is the belief, and in many cases this isn't true, but the belief is that an isolation movement, because you can isolate a muscle and sometimes work it through different planes and angles, that you can get a heavier focus on certain heads of a muscle. In other words, that there are types of tricep extensions you can do that will contract certain heads of, say, the tricep more than a bench press or a closed grip bench press or a weighted dip, right? So therefore, in that context, if you can do those things, and in certain cases it comes down to, does it stretch the tricep further to create a stronger stretch reflex in certain parts? Yeah, it can. It actually can. So if you do that, it might have the potential for adding some additional growth that you're not going to get on the compound movement. Now keep in mind, that is very theoretical. That has never once been proven under laboratory conditions. That's a theory. But if you're going to work off that theory, you see the problem we're going with this? Same thing, we can argue that, well, with certain types of curls, you can stretch and work the biceps a little different through certain stretches and range and planes of motion that you can't do with the chin up or a barbell row. Therefore, there are isolation movements for the biceps that might have the potential to stimulate additional growth in certain regions, certain emphasis of the bicep that don't get hit on those exercises to the same degree. But if you do a partial, you are reducing the number of muscle fibers you recruit. You're reducing the overall development an exercise can give because you're giving it less potential for muscle fiber recruitment. So if you're going to take an exercise and add it in because it allows you to stretch or contract a muscle in a different way than the big compound, you're doing so because hopefully it recruits more muscle fibers in that muscle, right? But when you start doing partials with it, what happens? You start reducing less muscle fibers. You start reducing the ranges of motion. You are losing any possible benefit that you could glean from doing the isolation movement at that point. Because isolation movements do not put more muscle on you. In other words, if you're not going to take an isolation movement and perform it in a way that will cause a muscle to grow more than it would from the compound you're already doing, you're wasting time. You're doing a completely useless exercise. Because you know what? A chin-up works your bicep. A chin-up works your rear delts. Chin-up works your lats. So if you're coming in and you're half-assing these exercises and cheating on them and finding ways to make sure you don't recruit the most muscle fibers by performing full contractions and stretches and things, you're wasting time. You could have just done another set of chin-ups or two and stimulated those muscles further, and most likely would have stimulated them better than these isolation movements. Because even people who don't go all the way down on a chin-up, they still get a deeper stretch on the bicep than the way a lot of people half-ass their curls, don't they? Yeah, of course they do. So if we want to talk about some of the most useless stuff that we see people do in the gym, is to take the time away from their big compound movements to do dumbbell work or do isolation work, and to come in and do half reps or 3/4 reps instead of actually getting the full range of motion of the exercise. It's a complete waste, and it's silly and it's counterproductive. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.